Hi everyone, Guy here, you're watching Midwinter Minis, and welcome to episode 4 of our speed painting HeroQuest series. In previous episodes we covered materials, prep and priming, every single piece of furniture, as well as making a start on the monsters by painting all of the skeletons. In this video we're going to be painting both the zombies and the mummies from the box set in beginner friendly steps using a very limited paint selection. Both these enemy types have basically the same colours and will use very similar techniques, so it'll make sense to batch paint them at the same time. These techniques will work just as well on the new Avalon Hill models as well as the old 80s models too, and I'll be painting up one of the old skeletons and mummies to show you how they look alongside their younger counterparts. All the models have some basic flagstone and dirt textures added to the bases, and they're primed and ready to go. First up, grab your khaki paint, thin it with a little water on your palette so it flows really nicely, and then base coat the entirety of the mummy models. While you wait for them to dry, add a tiny brush tip of red paint to your khaki to start making a flesh tone. Now depending on which red and khaki paint you've chosen for your project, you might want to add a little bit of yellow to make it a bit more bronzed than rosy, and play around by adding a tiny bit of red and yellow to your mix until you have a flesh tone that you're happy with, and then paint the heads, arms, torsos and feet of the zombie models. The newer models also have a few holes in their trousers which you can fill in with this too. Now by the time you've done this, the mummies will probably be dry enough to work on now, and now you can use this flesh tone to pick out the areas that look like their exposed skin underneath the bandages. Don't worry about being messy here, as we can fix up the bandages that get splattered with flesh tone later. Now to keep them in the same aesthetic vibe as the rest of the baddies, I'm going to use the same dark blue paint I used on the skeleton's robes to paint the trousers of the zombies. The new ones also have a little rag on the fabric of their arms too, which I'll also paint dark blue. Both old and new zombies have areas which would be perfect to use your brown paint on. First, the old models have a long staff on their weapons, so give that a base coat. Also, the new zombies have shields, which have obvious wooden parts in the middle, so give that a base coat on the front and back too. Don't worry about the trim and the boss of the shield, that's the name for the little metal thing in the centre of a shield by the way, we can fix them with silver later. While the brown is on your palette, mix a tiny bit of black into it to make a dark, desaturated brown, and we're going to use this new colour to base coat the nasty, stringy hair of the zombies. Now make sure to leave out their big old bald spots though. If you're painting any of the old mummy models, switch to your off-white paint and base coat its cute little vest. Okay, silver time. Grab whatever silver paint you're using for the project and base coat the zombie swords and the trim and boss of the shields. Now the new models have pretty soft, mysterious detail areas, especially around the hands holding the sword, so just give it your best shot. And if you think it looks a bit wrong, just go back with your flesh paint colour and try to fix the edges of the hand until it looks about right. You're working with really amorphous, blobby material here, so don't beat yourself up if it looks a bit weird. Now let's tidy up your grey bases with your grey paint. Just make sure any overspill from the base coats is nice and neat. Now let's do some quick soft dry brushing to add some cheaty details to all the models. Get a bit of off-white paint on your palette, and using your big bushy soft bristle dry brush, tap a bit of paint into it, and then do your best to rub away all of that paint, either on your palette or on a piece of kitchen paper or something, and then start brushing it on the model in soft swirling motions. The sticky out bits on the models will catch the paint, but it won't touch the recesses, making things look a little bit more 3D. See how cool the effect is on these mummies? You can also do this on the zombies too. This off-white is less stark than a pure white, so it doesn't look terrible even on the dark blue of the trousers. It just kind of makes them look worn and raggedy, which totally works for these models. Now let's mix up some dark wash by mixing black and brown washes. For these models, I'd say a ratio of about 1 part black to 3 parts brown should work really well. You don't really want it to be too black. Add a drop or two of water to the mix to make it less intense, and then paint it on all over every part of the models, even on the bases. If it settles too much, dry your brush off and tap it into the pools to wick away the excess. Otherwise it'll dry with ugly tide marks, and we don't really want that. This stage adds a depth to the shadows and also ties in all the previous colours with a bit of grit and grime, perfect for spooky dungeon dwellers. After that's all dry, you could absolutely call it a day for these models. Nothing fancy, but a million times better than playing yet another game with bare plastic models. But if you've got a bit more time to spend and fancy giving your detail brush a little whirl, let me show you some extra steps you can take to really elevate the paint jobs. The simplest thing you can really do to make the mummies pop is to thin down some of your off-white paint and pick out some of the top-facing parts of the bandages on the head, shoulders, arms, chest, and thighs. Be more and more sparse with these highlights as you go down the models. The most important areas are from the waist up, and especially the heads. You can also use the same paint with the same consistency to stipple on some highlights onto the old zombie's vest. Just tap the edge of your brush along the bits that were already lighter from the dry brushing stage, and it'll make a very natural looking raggedy texture. If you're following along with the same base style as I've done, I'm also going to use the same colour to highlight the back two edges of all the little card flagstones that I stuck down on the bases. To highlight the wood of the shields, I'm going to mix a bit of brown into the off-white paint to make it a bit of a lighter, paler brown, and then use the streaks of the wood texture in the plastic to guide my brush tip placement. Just a few here and there will give the effect of old beaten wood. Now to highlight the dark blue fabric, just add a tiny bit of blue to the palette and mix it into that light brown you just created for the wood highlight. And this should give you quite a nice light denim colour. Thin it nicely so it's a bit transparent, and use the lighter areas that the dry brush caught to guide your placement. Just sketch on this more vibrant, interesting blue to soften those scratchy dry brush highlights. Now, let's quickly mix up that flesh tone again, just as we did when we base coated the zombies' bodies, but this time I'm going to lighten it with a tiny bit of off-white to make a highlight colour for the flesh. And using exactly the same technique, thinning it with water so it's a bit see-through, and applying it on the places that already have been caught by the dry brushing step as a guide, and don't forget to highlight the tiny parts of the skin that are visible through the mummy's bandages too. As we've used lots of flesh and earth tones on these models, you might find that some borders between colours are a bit wishy-washy and ill-defined, so to bump up the separation, let's grab some black wash and do a little bit of careful recess shading with a detail brush on the dividing areas between colours, around the edge of the wood on the shield, at the hilt of the sword, in the eye sockets, in mouths, at the edge of clothes, places like that. As a final gross little touch, we can also add a tiny bit of black paint to some red to create a desaturated dried blood colour. Thin it with water and paint it onto random spots on the mummies' bodies. Add more black to the mix and apply it to the central area of the covered wounds to make the bandages look more blood-soaked. Nasty. You can also streak some onto the blades of the zombies too if you like, and finally paint the rims on the bases whatever colour you like. I'm going with black for mine, and then I'm going to give my models a quick blast of matte varnish to lock that paint in and knock back some of the shininess from the wash stage. My twins are constantly trying to get their hands on my minis, so hopefully it'll keep the paint in good nick too as the years go on. And there we go, all your zombies and all your mummies painted up in simple, achievable, beginner-friendly steps. But you know what? They look great. I'm really happy with them. In the next episode of the series, I'll show you how to paint all of the orc and goblin models in one go. They are some of the most common enemies in the game, so having them all painted up alongside the skeletons, mummies, zombies, and all of the furniture will really make your HeroQuest experience extra immersive. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.